Was going to come out here and start powder coating some of these parts, but it's just too damn cold. It got down to -10 last night. It didn't warm up much today, a little bit above zero. With the shop out here, after all day with the fire going in, I get it up to about 50. I was thinking about doing the basement and working on some of this stuff that I want to put on the lathe and do machine work on up there, but it's only about 45 degrees, 40 degrees in the basement. I just took my old dog up there to get him out of the cold, give him a better place to lay down. He's been outside most of the morning. He didn't want to go inside, but I finally got him to go in the basement where it's not quite so cold. But it's just too damn cold for me to do any work in there. I mean, you could do work, but I'm old enough now I don't need to suffer. Don't need to abuse myself anymore. I've done enough of that. So I got this pile all sandblasted and cleaned up. I worked on this till about 1 o'clock this morning. But there's parts in here that I could powder coat and then just put them away out of the way until I get ready to put everything back together. Well, like I said, it's just too damn cold to do it. I got to do the powder coating outside. And the powder doesn't really care how cold it is, but I do. So anyway, I got my oven going. I got my oven warming up to do the powder coating, but after fooling around out here for an hour or so, I just decided it's too damn cold to do anything. So I'm going to take some of these parts. This go up to the basement. This was going to go up there to be polished up, this shaft on there. I don't think there was any burrs or dings to take off on that, but...
Do you want to wait for the roast to get done, or you want a sandwich?
No, I can wait till the roast gets done. So anyway, I'll take a couple of these parts up to the basement that I'm going to do something with, whether I polish them up or replace them, rebuild new ones. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with those yet, but that's about all I'm going to do today. Oh, with this cold weather, it was pretty cold here in the basement. We don't have any insulation in the ceiling here in the basement, and the house up there has no heat in it, so all the heat goes through the ceiling up into the house. But anyway, it was pretty cold in here. It was like -5 or so outside at night, and he'd get up to maybe 10 or 15 in the daytime here for a week straight. So the temperature in here in the basement only get up to about 45 degrees. And I tried working in here. I could work in here a little bit for an hour or so, and then it just got too cold to do anything without wearing a hat and gloves and coat and everything else, and you can't really do that and work on this lathe like that, so didn't get a whole lot done here. The last thing I did on the lathe was to make the socket for pressing out that one bearing. This is the tool that I made to press it out with, and this was the receiver for the bearing to go down in. Anyway, that was the last thing that I did. Well, this piece here was so rusty and dirty, and it just made a mess all over everything with the oil getting spread around, and all of that rusty, nasty crap got all over everything. So anyway, I was able to get it warmed up enough in here to work on the lathe and clean everything up. I got all the rust and everything all cleaned up, and all that old chips and shavings and everything off of it. I had pulled the chuck off of there and got it cleaned up. So everything's all back cleaned and oiled again now, freshly cleaned and oiled. The project today is working on these housings for these bearings. This is the housing for the shaft for this is a pillow block bearing on the main shaft, the main saw blade shaft. I got new inserts for the bearings. I couldn't find the whole pillow block things and stuff. I had a heck of a time even finding the right inserts, and I finally got the right inserts for it. Well, this is the old insert that came out of that, and it's a sealed bearing. It's just a lifetime bearing or whatever. It's got rubber seals on it. And this is the bearing that I got to replace it with. So the difference between the two of them is this bearing is set up, it's a greasable bearing, so there's a groove here on one side of it with holes in it to go in to allow grease, to pressurized grease to get down in that bearing to lube it. Well, these bearing housings here don't have zerks in them, and they're not set up for that. Well, this This bearing housing, pillow block bearing, was set up for a greasable bearing. You can see it's got a zerk in it, or a threaded hole for a zerk in it. I took the zerk out, and then inside of the bearing here there's a groove that goes around it that zerk fits down into, and then when the bearing is put in there, it's a fairly tight fit. These bearings are gimbaled so that they're self-aligning. They can move a little bit in and out around inside of this housing to line up on the misalignment on the shafts, but they're fairly tight around there, so the grease, some of it will probably get pushed out around there and help lubricate that, but some of it is going to go down in and get pushed down into the bearing itself. Well, these bearing housings for this main shaft, they don't have that. They're not threaded for a zerk, and they don't have that groove in there. So that's what I'm doing here now, is I'm putting a groove in it. Now this is one of the bearing housings here for the main shaft, and I've already done that. I set this up on the lathe and I put a groove in there on it for that, and I still have to drill this and thread it for a zerk, but I got that groove in it. Now this one I set up in the lathe, and I used the chuck and held on to it on the outside here, and it's not perfect. It wasn't perfectly lined up, but it was good enough for what I needed. I got a pretty good groove in there for that grease to fit into. But this one here, the casting was way out on it, and I couldn't get it to line up at all. So what I wound up doing was mounting it up with the jaws internally inside the hole here, and that gives me just enough room to get my tool in there to make the groove. I don't have a regular grooving tool. What I've done here, I've got an internal threading tool, and that's what I'm using. So I'll just stick it in there, start a groove all the way around, and then move that back and forth until I widen that groove out enough, and that makes a good enough groove for what I need. So I'll get that groove put in there, and then I still have to take those down and drill them for a zerk. Oh, the other thing that I did on that was, these were pretty rough inside here from rust and stuff like that from age. They were crudted up in there. I sandblasted this all up and got all of the old paint and stuff off there, and they cleaned up pretty nice. But it was still pretty rough inside here, so while I had that mounted up on the lathe, I went ahead and took some emery cloth, or crocus cloth, emery cloth I guess, and cleaned that out, polished that out a little bit, and then some 400 grit sandpaper and polished it up some more. So these new bearings, fit in here a lot nicer now than they did. And you don't want them to be too sloppy in there, but those fit in there a lot nicer than they did. Oh, I'm going to powder coat these, so when I get done powder coating them, I'm still going to have to clean out that inside there so these bearings fit in there properly, but at least they fit in there better now. But I wanted to get all of this done before I powder coated them, because if I clamp these in the jaws once they're powder coated, then it's just going to tear the paint up, the powder up on them. Well, I've got one more bearing here that I'm probably going to do that with. This is the bearing that fits on the top of the edger blade shaft, or this is the housing for the bearing that fits on the top of the edger blade shaft. And the bearing that goes in that, the new bearing for that, is also a greasable bearing, but again, this one doesn't have anything for grease in it, so it needs, this is what it looks like inside. It's been sandblasted, and it's a little bit rough around there. So we'll polish that up inside, kind of take the edges off of this a little bit, the sharp edges, make it easier to get that bearing in there, and then put a groove in it and put a zerk in it. So I measured one of these other housings where that groove started, and it's about 2/10 of an inch in. You know, I went ahead and measured this one and marked it. Now I've set up my threading tool 2/10 of an inch in. Well, anyway, I'll go ahead and start making a groove there. I've got it set up slow speed, and everything's clear. clean that hole out. I got these grooved and polished up inside, these two large ones for the main shaft. This one is the one for the edger blade shaft, and that one I just polished up the inside of it. This is the one bearing that goes on the top of the edger blade shaft. I put a little groove on it and polished it up, and then this is the one for the adjustable edger blade, and I just cleaned it up a little bit inside. Just had some nicks on it on the outside edge here. I just used the deburring tool to deburr those, and just polish that up. So those are all cleaned up and ready to be worked on down at the shop. Right now what I've got is this spacer that goes between the blade and the nut that goes on the end of it. And that was just burred up a little bit on the end. I just took just the lightest of cuts off the end of it, just enough to take the marks off of it. And now I'm doing the same thing with the side of it there. Just enough to just take the marks out of it where it was chewed up. Somebody had horsed on it with a pipe wrench or something and marked it all up. And I'm just taking a light cut on that just to clean those burrs up and stuff. I don't want to. This outside edge doesn't matter so much. The outside diameter doesn't matter so much. I didn't want to change the length of it at all because that does affect where the main blade is. To finish this cut up, and I'll chamfer both the inside diameter and the outside diameter of this and swap it around and do the same thing on the other side. This is that spacer that goes outside of the saw blade, and then the nut goes up against it, and I've got it cleaned up. Like I said, I didn't do anything hardly on this outside edge except knock the burrs of it off, and on this on the ends of it rather. I didn't want to change the length of it. The diameter didn't matter too much, so I took it down a little bit to take the burrs off. I got a little bit of a step in there. If I had taken that out, I might have got all these pits out of there, but it didn't really matter. Just smoothed it out, smoothed out the inside of it a little bit. Well, it'll be painted up, that'll be better than it was. Now what I got on there is that spacer that goes on the inside of the saw blade. I'm facing that off. That's got a welded section on there, a little piece on there that stuck way out that it was a weld. That's what the pin is that drives the saw blade. That's where it was drilled and came all the way out there. And there's some other marks and stuff on there. Once I get that off, I'll go ahead and just face that off just lightly, just to take all the burrs and stuff off, and then do the same thing with the outside edge of it there. That's upside smoothed up, and I chamfered that edge up. Didn't take much off of that, but still got some nicks in it, but they're innies and not outies. Well, now I'm going to do this side, and this side's not too bad. Actually, mainly it's just this. So I'm not going to take anything off of this. Just this. So I'm going to put the marks on there from a pipe wrench. I'm just going to smooth those off a little bit and then chamfer that. Now that saw blade rests on this portion right here, puts pressure on it, and then there's a pin that sticks out here that engages in that blade to drive it. Actually, I am going to take that off just a little bit. I want to make sure those two faces on that are perfectly parallel with each other. So I'm going to stick a 1, 2, 3 block in there behind it to register that up against. I'm just going to take a skim cut across the face of that just to make sure these two faces are parallel. check that again just to make sure. Just to make sure that I've got that registered in there properly. That's not taking off a whole lot there. They've got a pretty good gap there yet, so take just a little bit more off of that. Lock down this carriage. Well, that still doesn't have the whole thing parallel there, and then take just a little bit more off. Wow, man, that thing is still not coming. I'm kind of coming awful close though. Alright, that gives me a flat face there that's parallel with the other side. I took more off of there than I expected. Now I'm going to do something I don't need to do. I'm going to true off this interface here where it's relieved out. Now that's immaterial how deep that is or anything, but what I want to do is I want to make sure that that is the same surface as this. I'm going to try to register that on these jaws here to see if I can get that outside trimmed up then. Alright, that one is cleaned up pretty good. Looks a lot better than it did. There's still some hash marks in there, but they're pretty well cleaned up. I got to drill this out and put a new pin in there for that drive pin, but otherwise we're looking at that one's looking good. Now this is the piece that goes on the other side, on the outside, and that's got some pretty good divots in it there. So I'm going to do the same thing with it. I'm going to true it up, and then we'll be done with that much of it. Well, I was trying to figure out how I was going to register and mount this last plate up here, this last spacer up, and register to the back. Now I've got it trued up on the back side, on the other side over there. It's trued up nice, and I want to register this side to the back side to make sure that they're exactly parallel, concentric, well, not concentric, but parallel with each other. And I don't want to take very much off of this. Again, I don't want to change the dimensions on that much. But I was trying to figure out how I was going to do that. This thing is not deep enough to reach inside the jaws, and with the other one I used a 1, 2, 3 block to set down in there to register that against the 1, 2, 3 block. But this one would still set down too deep in there, and I didn't have anything else any wider to register that against that would have been flat, like the 1, 2, 3 block. Well, I was trying to figure out some way to do that to make sure I got that set up so that I could machine this side up so it's perfectly parallel with that other side. I was actually thinking about changing it over and using it on my little 6-inch lathe, because the jaws on the 6-inch lathe would have fit on the inside of that, and I could have registered it on there, on that chuck. But I got to looking at it, and then I realized that I could reverse these jaws and mount it up in the jaws and register it right on the jaws. So that's what I've done. I reversed the jaws on the 3-jaw chuck here, and got it set in there with this side that I faced off registered against that jaw. I was hoping I could do it on the outside one here, but the jaws don't close enough. That's too small a diameter to do that on, so I've got to do it on the inside one. And because it's on the inside and these jaws stick out farther, then I'm going to use a boring bar to face that off instead of my regular cutoff, my regular tool, as I would have had to turn it at an angle and messed with it and stuff to get it to sit right. So anyway, instead of fooling around with it, I'm just going to go ahead and use a boring bar to face that off and get that smoothed up. So there's, like I said, that was kind of beat up a little bit. It's got some protrusions on it that stick out that would cause it to bind or not fit flat against the saw blade. So we're all set up, and I'll go ahead and do that. Alright, looks like I can take just a little bit more off of that. Okay, that's much better. Well, anyway, that's better than it was. I don't think I mean, still got a bunch of chattering on there and stuff, pits and hash marks and stuff like that on there, but none of it protrudes out over the edge anymore. It's nice flat surfaces to fit against that saw blade now. That's what I was looking for. Oh, I've got a few more pieces that need to be polished up now. That's all of it that need to be turned of any kind. But I've got some polishing to do on some of them. Oh, I've got to change those jaws back around the other way. This is one of the things I want to polish the bore on this, the inside bore of that. I want to polish that up, but I don't want to do it here. I want to do it with the full length of the jaws so that it gets supported all across the whole, all of these edges here on this sheave.